Welcome to the Darnell and Cody show, where we talk about social, political, and philosophical issues currently relevant to us as a society. Today's topic is tribalism. And tribalism can be simply defined as the mentality that what is best is that which is part of your group, regardless of what that group is or represents. It is a blind loyalty, blind faith, or at the very least, it is faith and loyalty to a party without any reason other than that you are a part of that party. It can be ideology, religion, nationality, race, ethnicity, place of residence, or even sports teams. Things like hooliganism in sports is something to consider, where a football fan would literally kill someone in a riot if their team loses. The KKK is a good example of tribalism founded on racism, and I don't need to go into the atrocities they have committed, but we could also throw Nazis into this mix. Then we have nationalism, where there is this religious loyalty to the country, where the nation can do no wrong, and even if it does something reprehensible, it's justified because it's in the interest of the nation to not be ridiculed, criticized, or punished. We saw what nationalism did during the world wars, but basically most historical wars were founded on nationalism. And in fact, nationalism is so powerful that governments go to many lengths to instill it in their citizens because it's a useful tool to control people. And then we have even ideas being used in tribalism. During the Cold War, two countries battled over capitalism and communism. And although in the grand scheme of things, it was less of a battle of ideas, as it was a battle between two superpowers seeking to edge an advantage, it still shows how powerful this tool of tribalism is in getting people on board for whatever purpose, even if it means violence. And I don't think I have to go into specific examples as to how religion fits into this picture of tribalism. There's countless examples throughout history. These days, we see not a new, but a growing trend of social justice warriors that have essentially formed a tribe under the banner of social justice and political correctness. So even something that has benevolent intentions like justice for socially disadvantaged people can be corrupted when it forgets to be introspective about its own behavior and methods. The most dangerous people are those that are ignorant, but are unable to recognize their own ignorance. And I think this is a fitting definition of the current social climate that we find ourselves in. To be sure, we must be supportive of those that face social injustice, regardless of their gender identity, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and whatever other label. But there is a real problem when people that do not have a profound or even shallow understanding of what social justice really entails go around acting like buffoons and violent hooligans. That's where the tribalism kicks in. And these people are so convinced that they're correct and they're the good guys, so to speak, that they refuse to even listen to what they perceive as the other side. As if you weren't a liberal, you couldn't be a good person or possibly care about minorities or social justice. And that's just one example. I'm not saying that all liberals are social justice warriors or that all social justice warriors are even liberals, but it's an interesting example of how this movement has gotten out of control. To put a simple example to kind of wrap up my point, is the Evergreen controversy, where a professor that protested against racism actually was called a racist by social justice warriors. To sum up that controversy, a group of students demanded that white students not come to campus for a day, a reversal of a tradition in school, where black people couldn't come to camp or didn't come to campus to show that it would be to show what it would be like to not have black people on campus. I believe the intent was to show that if black people were absent, then they would see how things would be less desirable, and it would help people appreciate black people more. Now they demanded that there be a reversal of this tradition, and Dr. Brett Weinstein refused, stating that one racial group telling another racial group where it can or can't be is in fact racist and against the spirit of the whole tradition to begin with. And then, of course, outrage and protests followed. He was basically forced to resign. And if you look at the history of Dr. Weinstein, he's actually the furthest possible human being from racism. And this is just one of those increasingly many situations where sensationalist outrage and parroting of social phrases is a detriment to the actual interest of social justice, and how it has become less an ideology, it has become merely tribalism. And all this isn't very surprising when our presidential elections are similar to a mixture of America's Got Talent and the Super Bowl. So what do you think about this, Cody?
Well, I absolutely agree. The political climate in America has certainly gotten more tribal, as you have said. You see it from the left with shutting down freedom of speech, basically, with people on campus, not just with the case you mentioned, but just speakers coming and being protested until they're not allowed to actually speak due to threats of violence. You have people like Antifa that go around masked in black hoods and start lighting things on fire in the street, causing chaos and essentially anarchy on campuses in some cases. And then you have cases on the far right also, such as the Unite the Right rally in August of 2017, where white nationalists were marching in the streets with weapons and batons, things of this nature, with swastika banners. And then you had protesters basically yelling at them, making threats. And during this situation, you had an activist of the white nationalists actually drive their vehicle into a crowd of people, killing a woman and injuring 19 others. So this obviously leads to violence on both ends, it seems like. And I'm curious, in your opinion, where does this violence end if we don't do something about it? Are we going to start seeing rebel armies rising up, acting against the police and the government, kind of more stepping up the Antifa's game, or perhaps on the right side with white nationalists refusing to obey the law? What is your opinion on how far this could go if we don't solve our problem here in our society?
Well, I don't think there would be something drastic as a rebel army, but I am frightened that given the history that humanity has, we are going to continue down this road of tribalism, unfortunately. And what's going to happen is that it's going to impede any progress that we hope to achieve and attain. And we're going to be fighting against ourselves, essentially, because we can't come to agreements, not because we agree with the ideas even, we just can't bring ourselves to agree with the other side. I think that's what's happening with Trump and the liberals right now, that they just hate each other so much. There's so much animosity between them that to get anything done is almost impossible. So it's not really about the issues anymore. It's just more like, I can't work with this guy, I can't work with that guy. You know, they're calling each other names, and the media doesn't help, right? The media is just picking sides too and all this. And I'm not trying to defend Trump. I mean, I don't think he's doing a good job either, but we have to be able to look at him at least as the president, because that's what he is. At least respect the title, at least respect the other side's viewpoints, whether you be a liberal or a conservative. That's the method that we should be approaching.
Right. It's all about compromise, is what you're saying, essentially. We need to hear each other's opinions, and then we need to not just butt heads and demand one way or the other. We need to work together to solve a problem and actually come to the solution to our problems. And that's how we move forward. And that's not what we're seeing. And it happens with not just the political figures, but the voters themselves in some cases are, you hear people go back and forth on different Twitter feeds or comment sections. There's just so much outrage and animosity towards one another when they disagree with someone's political viewpoints or ideology. You see people kind of just like jump to anger almost, and I'm not sure if the internet has something to do with that. With being anonymous, it helps people just vent their rage in some way, perhaps, or maybe it's just easier to show what you're really thinking and that you actually are outraged at people that think differently than you. It's very interesting to see, and obviously, as you said, the political candidates themselves just kind of add fuel to the flame. They don't try to reach the compromises that really that is how we progress as a nation.
Right, and you bring a good point about this age of social media and the internet. At this point, people can be themselves the most behind the anonymity of the internet. So whatever their motives may be, it can be something simple as truly expressing what they believe, or it can just be trolling. And it really brings the question, what is the mind state of the standard typical internet user, which is basically everyone? What is the goal here? What are we trying to really accomplish. And I feel like people have given up in a lot of ways doing the right thing or being a responsible person on the internet. It's funny to even suggest such a thing, right? It's like basically everything's a meme now. Nothing is to be taken seriously. And then in reality, you have these people that are basically walking memes. So you have the social justice liberals, basically a meme, and then you have the I don't know what they're called, the Pepe Frog people on the conservative side, who I guess they're just trolls that believe in right wing alt right policies. And then you come to the conclusion that there really is no one to connect the bridge between these two people. They're just, it's almost like fire and water. There's always going to be constantly fighting no matter what. And it's a sad sight to see. This is the root of the problem. This is exactly what tribalism is. And we have to find a way to combat this.
Right. And we also need to be able to have these conversations without worrying about being called a racist. Liam Neeson recently made the comments where he was stating along the effects of his friend had been raped 40 some years ago. This case had happened, and he was so distraught by the fact that his friend had been raped that he went out seeking violence by the same race of perpetrator as the rapist himself, which happened to be a black man. So he was out searching for a black man to basically step up to him so that he could potentially beat this man to death, threaten this man's life in some way. And he himself was disgusted by this behavior. He came down from it after a week or so, he had said in the interview that took place afterward. And that's another thing, that when he was making these comments, the first interview never asked any of these questions. They just let him kind of spill his guts without getting context. And then he, of course, got blamed as being a racist. So he was explaining that he was appalled by his behavior after he came down from his rage. And that he realized that that's how this can start, is something like this. You just blame people with this tribal violence, that it's like this primal rage, he was saying. And he was making the case where violence would perpetuate violence. He himself would have done violence to a black man. That black man's friends may have gotten the same rage that he had felt by losing a friend, and they would have perpetuated the violence over and over and over again. And instead of being able to make this important point and talk about this important issue, he's just kind of getting thrown under the bus by some people. And it's really disturbing that we need to worry about this. We need to be able to have important discussions and not worry about people taking our words out of context. And we also need to be able to judge each of these cases on a case-to-case basis. With Liam Neeson, don't just assume that he's a racist. You need to hear him out, learn about the actual case, learn about him as an individual. And that's the way that you need to go about all of these situations. A lot of people are just reacting to the outrage and become outraged themselves, which is quite dangerous and tribal.
Right. And this brings into question the standard of redemption. We had cases before where a reformed racist, for example, or reformed KKK member, they're accepted back into society under certain absolvement. But where is the standard, right? Where's the logic behind who is redeemed, who is capable of redemption, and who is not? That's another question that we have to consider.
Yeah, there's a clear contradiction in logic there between certain progressives. They get outraged over something that happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago sometimes in these situations. Complete outrage, demanding for, boycotts or for people to resign in certain situations. And then they're also okay with the criminal redemption as well. They think that criminals should be not put to death. A lot of them don't believe in the penalty, and they believe that all criminals can be redeemed in society in some way, at least. So it's very contradictory.
I agree. So who decides that it's okay, that a certain amount of time has passed, that he has paid back his due? And I don't see the standard right now. All I'm seeing is that people electively choose to be pissed off or not pissed off, like not outraged, depending on their mood. It's like a social mood that they say, all right, today let's grind our pitchforks against this person and this person, but let's redeem these people and these people whenever, they feel like it. And it's really troubling. And this goes back to how we have this tribal mindset now that basically people can forgive and lynch whoever they want, so as long as it suits their purpose. It's really not about any reasonable or logic that we can conjure, because for me right now, I can't really imagine what Liam Neeson did that was so terrible as a person right now. He didn't, in fact, kill someone. He just had an angry moment, which is understandable after something tragic happens to your friend. I feel like everyone has at one point felt great anger and wanted to harm someone, but he didn't act on it. And now he's saying that, look, I had these thoughts 30 years ago and I feel horrible. 40 years ago. And I feel horrible about feeling this, having that experience. I'm coming out to talk about it now so that people shouldn't be like this. Don't be like what I was like at that moment. And something that everyone should talk about and care about. It's an important issue. And that very feeling that he had was actually a kind of a tribal mindset too. He was saying, it doesn't matter who it is, just some black guy, because the guy that raped my friend was a black guy, so I gotta kill someone. It's a horrible thing. It's a racist, horrible thing to think about. But he didn't act on it, and now he's coming out not to brag or talk about this emotion. He's talking about how he needed help, he sought help, and he redeemed himself, essentially. He got better, and he feels guilty about having these emotions. That's something that we should be applauding, not grinding our pitchforks to, calling him a racist and basically doing everyone a disservice, because he didn't have to talk about this. He didn't have to bring up his past, but he did for the benefit of society. He wanted everyone to know that these feelings exist and these things can happen, and that we have to talk about them as a nation and not bury them and pretend it never happened, because that really doesn't solve anything.
Exactly. I mean, as I said, and we can't as a society constantly be worrying about, having these important conversations. These are incredibly important conversations that will essentially be able to fix our society if we open them up to free dialogue and we get the solutions that you'll get by having these conversations. You can't worry about all of this stuff being taken out of context and constantly looking over your shoulder for someone calling you a racist on Twitter or what have you, and then it becoming the next news cycle. It's just not a good way to go about things. And it seems tribal in of itself to actually behave that way. I think you had said that earlier, where people are just jumping to whatever the outrage politics basically dictates, and it's very, very bizarre to watch.
Yes, I agree 100%. And this goes back to my point I brought up in the intro, where even something like sports, people are willing to die and kill to cheer on their team. It's gotten so, I shouldn't say it's gotten, but it's more like we have a very clear view of how frail and simple the human mind is. It easily latches on to any entity, and then it's willing to die and fight over that basically idea of belonging, sense of belonging. It's a very powerful feeling. It's a very important feeling that we need as a society and community. Like, we should always feel a sense of belonging towards our community. We should care about our community. And it starts really at the family level, where you belong to a family and you really have the best interest for the family. But then I feel like people are, because it's such a common feeling, that people are now just projecting it onto anything they can, like sports teams, political identity, school, agenda, like anything. It's become like a game. It's a game to these people, where I'm cheering on my side and I hope my side wins. It's a sports, like they're just watching and clapping along and cheering, and then they're willing to also die over that. And it's really quite bleak. And we need more people to be aware of what is something that's worth being tribal about, essentially. Tribalism in itself isn't bad in a sense that, yes, we should have this backing of each other as fellow human beings. So if like an alien species comes, it's like, well, have to kind of band together if it's the alien is, threatening us as a species. Same with families. Even if my mother did something terrible, commits a crime, it's still my mother, and I have to be there for her. It's kind of like those primitive feelings that we have, and those feelings are important too, but because we're not purely logical beings. But it can't be to a point where there's like no logic to it at all. Everything is just being projected from this primal feeling. I think that's where the danger is, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Right, and people, I think, also don't realize just how bad of a data intaker the human mind is. Right, like, it's not a reliable data intaker. Your memories aren't reliable. What you see is kind of put into context for your brain to comprehend. It's not that reliable in of itself. All these things are why we use scientific tools to measure things instead of just using our eyeballs and our other senses. So this is kind of plays into people's just like feelings over real factual information. They're just going with what they feel is true, and they get emotionally attached, as you said, to these different groups of belonging, essentially. And there's not really any backing or substance to that belief when you really get down to it with them. It's just a total emotional feeling of what's true.
Right. And that's what's really dangerous, right? When truth no longer matters. What matters is something that makes me feel good, right? And I feel like that's the dystopian future that we have to be afraid of, where nothing true matters. It's purely about what emotional benefit I can get from, or sensational benefit I can get from society or reality. Because what you have then is there is no standard. It's everyone for themselves. There's no unity. There's no anything. There's only tribalism. It becomes a very, not even a tribe really, just pure individualism where it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It's just about me, 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 me. And that's like the destruction of society, right? But let's talk about something like race. Race is like perhaps the most divisive thing that we can talk about in terms of how tribalism has come about. From a sociological standpoint, race is purely a social construct that has no basis scientifically, either genetically or biologically. And we can see this in the way that race is employed in different societies. Brazil, for example, has a completely different view of race than Americans. And furthermore, take a look at how white supremacist groups like the KKK or the Nazis view race. The Nazis didn't consider European Jews to be white. And if you look at America in the early 20th century, the Irish and Italians weren't considered white when they first migrated. In fact, the origin of blackface comes from Irish immigrants mocking black people to suggest that the Irish were white too. And then this is the starting of skin tone becoming the defining factor. So we see that the concept of race has changed throughout the years, and while ethnicity and ethnic groups are a real thing, race has largely just been used as a tool to divide and label people into groups. And we see that in full effect in the modern age, where race is weaponized and used as a tool to attack people, whether it's race baiting or hate crimes. Simply put, race doesn't have an objective reality. It's more so brought about for our convenience of labeling people's skin color or physical features. So it's time to stop using race as an identity. It's not something to celebrate. It's intrinsically prejudiced and divisive. It's a lazy way of looking at a fellow human being. And it's about time that we actually address it as such, instead of trying to trick people into celebrating the color of their skin, which causes racism and supremacist groups, while continuing to divide people into different groups for no real merit or meaningful purpose. Like Martin Luther King once said, he dreams of one day being judged based on his character and not his skin color. I find it interesting that people can quote that quote and still believe in this concept of race that is so divisive. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I certainly agree. It's obviously race is, I would call it like a relative term for each nation. As you said, Brazil has this different concept of race than we do. It's interesting when you look at certain countries over in Asia, such as Japan, where they basically view other Asians not as Japanese people, where in America we just consider them all a subset of Japanese, or I'm sorry, Asian. So I feel as though you're right, where we just need to basically follow Martin Luther King's advice here and just judge people by their own personal character. It doesn't really matter what someone's skin color is, and it shouldn't give them credence, or it shouldn't give them any negative connotations. It should just be a human being that you judge on an individual basis and on an individual merit, regardless of how they appear.
Right. It just really makes no sense to divide teams and tribes based on skin color. I get that it has almost a biological factor in that we are a warlike people, human beings, and we have evolved to basically group together to survive. So it's like, oh, these people are from a different area. They're probably invaders. We have to group together and fight and kill. It's like a very like primitive ape-like gene that we have inherited from our ancestors. But it's time to let go of that. We have better tools. We have better developed brains. We have everything in our favor to make a better society, a more informed, enlightened society. And it starts with getting rid of tribalism and really progressing towards something better, which is grouping under rationalism and compassion.
And that kind of, again, plays into just how bad of a data intaker the human mind is. Where nowadays we have so many multicultural citizens and even twins that are born with white skin, and then one of them has black skin or darker skin. So again, the human eye isn't a good judge of what someone's race is or ethnicity is, regardless. Someone may appear a way, and you might be completely wrong in your assumptions based on what you think their ethnicity actually is. So that's why it's really just it's bigoted. It's just not good. It's not helpful for society in general to judge someone by how they look. You're probably going to be wrong on your assumptions anyway. So you might as well just get to know someone before you start judging them.
Right. And our data input from visual clues and cues are important to be sure in the sense that there are first impressions, and in a situation where that's all you have to use it to your benefit. But it's not that way anymore. I feel like we can easily get to know a person quickly. We're not living in an age where everyone is a potential enemy, at least not in the sense that our ancestors grew up in, right? Not that kind of environment where if you see like a jaguar, you have to instantly determine based on how it looks whether it's dangerous or not. Now we're looking at people around us. We should be able to have a second check and say, okay, he looks this way, but that's not enough. I should know more about him before I make any meaningful judgment on him. And I feel like that's really hard to ask of people these days.
Well, it's certainly hard, especially with the social media, with we talked about already, where people just kind of read like 13 word Twitter sentence, and they kind of make this assumption or judgment based on that alone for someone. It's not helpful, and it's trying to limit the way people speak. You see this even in news programs now, where they just kind of like speed through the news cycle. In 2 minutes they have a news story and then they get on with the next one. You need to be able to hear people out, get to really understand what's happening when people are talking. That's why long form conversations are so important. And that's how you really are going to learn about what someone's opinion is, if they have any substance to their opinion, whether it's a valid opinion, whether their reasoning of their logic is valid, all these other things. You need to hear someone out before you can judge this. You can't get 2 minutes or just a little blurb on the internet and make these judgments that are going to be accurate at least.
Right. And so it has a lot to do with just the degradation and laziness of the human being. And I think it's also plays into this point where people have to care to find out what people actually think, to care about what is the truth and honest view of this X person, right? And I feel like that's not happening. People don't care. They're already convinced that they're right and that their team is right. And a lot of times I feel like it doesn't even matter if their team is right. It's their team. And that's the tribalism where it kicks in. And it's a huge problem. And frankly, I feel like we should wrap up with this question in mind. What is the solution to fix tribalism? We have talked about how it's a problem and how things could be so much better, but how do we bring that about?
Well, I think that we have to start with education, and that needs to be early on. I think we talked about this a little bit in our earlier podcast about education, but you need to be able to teach kids how to objectively think about things, look at things from different angles or perspectives, be able to judge things on their merit and not just on what they feel might be accurate. And again, that needs to start at an early age, I think, because otherwise you're going to have almost instilled beliefs very quickly on certain issues. So I think that hitting the school and teaching better curriculum is the best way to get about a solution. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a generation or two to really see the outcome of that.
Right. I couldn't agree more. It's really, you really have to start from not necessarily prepubescence or at an age like that, but you want to start somewhere around their teens. You want to teach kids to really think for themselves, know how to think, teach them what it means to be thinking, critical skills, creatively, and how to formulate an opinion that isn't just based on emotions or what you would like to be true. It's okay to be wrong, but it's not okay to not care if you're wrong. That's something that we can't tolerate. And I think that's the big problem here today, where it's almost like religion, where it doesn't matter what anybody says. This is my faith. And that's okay for matters of faith, I suppose, but not for political ideologies, things that everyone is concerned with, not just, spiritually, but practically. And that's where we have to start, I feel. We have to really go back, kind of rewind, and we can't have our children's models be Instagram and Twitter and these celebrities like dancing and rapping about God knows what these days. We have to get that. We have to be better role models. We have to get better role models in place. We have to build a better foundation and better environment where they can learn. And hopefully things will, like you said, shape up to be better in a generation or two.
Right, and that really just, at the end of the day, if we don't take care of this problem, we're going to see more and more of the cases of tribalism, more and more violence, more and more things just being reactionary politics, outrage politics, things that don't have any substance, don't have any value to our society just in general. And we're not going to get to solutions unless we actually solve our problems at the core level here.
Right. And I think that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in. I hope to catch you next time.
See you guys.